All right. Well, I'll perfect.
Okay. I guess we're now going to be history. So welcome everybody, and as I think we've already talked, I'm going to talk about how we engage people using a narrative storyline approach in terms of environmental education. If you want to think about it, there were some Canadians on the call. I know they might recognize his name, Thomas King, who was the creator of the Dead Dog Cafe on CBC Radio. One of his more famous quotes is to say, "The truth about stories is that's all we really are." Another way of putting it would be, our lives are literally a story unfolding in context, complete with characterization, conflict, resolution, and beginning, middle, end story form. It's by narrative that we experience our lives. But the funny thing is, that's not how we teach. When we teach, we design programs, we talk about outcomes, which are really important, and activities. And that's how we teach. There's me up in the corner there, teaching away in my standard kind of format. But if we actually go and meet somebody and have a conversation with them in the pub or over lunch, we don't tell them about our outcome goals. We tell them about our lives and our stories. So, for example, for me, I don't go sit down next to someone and say, my outcome goal for this term is to get 1 point higher average teaching evaluations. Instead, I sit down with somebody and I say, you know what? We are running this amazing environmental studies program here, and we went to this residential program experience at this camp, and all these great things happen, and I start to tell you stories. So as teachers, we organize in terms of outcomes and activities, but as learners, we learn through stories. There's a bit of disconnect. But what I guess I want to challenge you with tonight is to say that as teachers and as educators, if we're only using outcomes and activities, we're only doing half the work. The other half is to translate the outcomes and activities into stories. And that's what this webinar is about. I'm going to talk about why one would do it. I'm going to give you a detailed example of how this works in action. I'm going to talk about lots of different storylines for learners from age 5 to 85. And we'll talk about developing a storyline topic. Why is this important? Just to summarize, because we organize our memories, we organize our experience in terms of our personal stories. And we also learn from the stories of other people, whether we read it or we listen to it. So storyline design is providing a program as a story in which learners participate and co-create. Learners construct their own meaning through action and involvement. At the end, I'll give you a slide with resources. There's a storyline website, and there's a book that's kind of written about this, although not so much focused on environmental education as more broadly focused. So what is a storyline approach? It's a sequence of pre-planned episodes in which students take on meaningful roles in a story to solve problems. It's almost like creating a play, like creating a drama. The educator sets the scene, introduces the characters, defines the questions, and you have a series of episodes. And that is what the learners come as playing a role. And that role isn't just a scripted role. It's a role where they can improvise. It's an improvised play or an improvised script because they're creating the episode with the facilitators. So what I want to do is move to giving you a kind of a detailed example of this. It's going to be focused on grade 5 just because that's one I have good slides of. But I'm going to be talking after that about how you could do this with high school youth, how you do it outdoors in the community, et cetera. I'll give you a range of examples, but the first one is going to be grade 5. Before we do that, maybe I can just find out what kind of learners you tend to work with as your most primary group, be it elementary, junior high, high school, post-secondary, or adult.
And Alan, while you're doing that, I'll just say that I've just looked at some of the stats from the earlier question. We have about, of those people who answered, where are you from? We have about 1/4 Canadians, maybe 20% Canadians, 80% from the U.S., and including someone from Hawaii. So
I want to go to Hawaii. Okay. So the example I'm going to give you is a program called Mysterious Encounters Earth. It's for grade 5 students, and in case you can't get it from the slide, it's a detective story or detective story time where we set the scene, create the characters, and pose the problem. This program involves things in the classroom, and then they go outside for a day in the forest, and then back for follow-up. The way it starts is not we're going on a trip. It starts with a letter that arrives on one kid's desk in the classroom, like, say, Jeanette's desk. And the letter basically asks Jeanette whether she and her classmates want to go on a adventure to solve the secret formula for all life, to try to find out what it is, and if they want to work with the Ecolibs, which is a secret eco-detective agency. So that's the start, and they write back and they say, yes, we're keen to go, we want to come. Well, the next thing that arrives in their classroom is a CD, and the CD sounds like this. It may take a little bit for you to load, depending on your computer, but here it goes. Looking like this, the detective sneaks in the classroom and gives them some exercises and tells them about the secret mission. And the program goes forth because by the time that they arrive on the outside, on the trip day, they're going to meet a bunch of characters. One is the chief. The chief is kind of the tough character, but really cares about the earth, sort of the trickster character in this story. The heroes in this story, one set of heroes in this story are the agents, the leaders. In this program, university students and high school leaders do leading the kids in small groups through this whole series of outdoor activities. So the leaders are the agents, and the kids, of course, are really the heroes. So they do a detective application in the classroom. They fill out sheets to make sure they got secret vocabulary and they know what the formula is, so that when they arrive on the day of the trip, they are prepared. Sometimes they come in costume, actually. They also know what the problem is, and the problem is that they know they're looking for a formula: healthy food plus fresh air plus clean water, and they're looking for three things: blank plus blank plus blank. That's the storyline purpose of the day. Now, if you look at the storyline purpose, over on the left side are our learner outcomes, but over on the right side are episodes. So to increase appreciation and enthusiasm on the left means touch the earth on the right in learner terms. The understanding is know the workings of the earth. To reduce your environmental impact is care for the earth. In fact, they're looking for three words: touch, know, care. That's the story for the kids. So when they arrive, for example, on the bus, the first thing is the leaders board the bus and they interrogate them. And in fact, they have to go up, they meet their leaders outside, and then they have to go upstairs to the carrot, and they're interrogated by the chief, because all the preparations haven't gone right. But of course, we want to blame that on the teacher, not on the kids. So the kids are ready to go out and look for the secret formula. Now, here's their interrogation. They head outside, and of course, it's not a workbook. That's a secret detective notebook. It's an investigation book sort of thing. And then you have, like, touch is the word for touch the earth. And they do a series of activities, looking at leads or slides. These are some earth education activities. And after each activity, they get one letter of the word touch, one skill. The skill for looking at leaves is to observe. in terms of what they do. They might then go and look at small things under the ground, and they get another series of letters. And ultimately, the first part of the day, the first episode, is touch. The second part about understanding is to learn some basic ecological concepts. They might, and then we're doing know the workings of the earth, KNOW. They do an activity called sunlight investigators and food chains. They turn themselves into sunlight and sunlight superheroes, and they go up a food chain starting at the sun, and then they get captured in a leaf, and then they get eaten by a caterpillar. That's one activity. Another activity which comes from Earth Ed stuff is photosynthesis, the food factory. All these things, the KNOW is about 4 activities. The third part then is the care in the formula. And the secret ingredient is what they're looking for in their investigations. And they do a series of skits and theater. And ultimately, they take an Earth step, something that they can do, which they post in the classroom. And ultimately, they then talk to the chief about their whole day. And they return from Ecolease headquarters. And so the whole program, the whole story is healthy food plus fresh air plus clean water. In order to get those things, we need to touch the earth, we need to know the workings of the earth, and we need to care for the earth. That's how the storyline works together. And then there's a website, and I'll show you the link later. The kids can go from home on the website, they put their agent name and their mission password in, and they can get new missions at home, like there's a big mission here to see how many times you can turn off the light in a week in your house without your parents noticing it. Undercover. So the idea is that you can sort of see is the fun, the activity, the experience. Some questions come up. How do children perceive the integration of storyline and environmental goals? Can the storyline become so powerful that the experience that they're learning is compromised? Do students really distinguish between fantasy and real learning? What's real to them? So to kind of answer those questions, I've done a bunch of research talking to lots of kids. And here's one, obviously particularly articulate kid, but I think she expresses how kids see this approach. So again, this may take a second to load. You did something to represent the learning. She started off, too, when we asked her what it was about. She said it's about the earth. She didn't say it was about detectives and it was about solving problems. It was about the earth, and you do something to represent the learning. And I think that the kids basically understand the meaning and the goals and the education in it. Just like when you read a story, you understand the moral. You understand what the story is really about. It's not about the plot. It's about the story, the meaning of what's underneath it. So this is just one example that we've done. A couple of people are noting this kind of does come from the Earth education, some of the activities and some of the ideas. But the storyline approach goes much further than that. Let me give you a different example. This is what one of my students did with high school youth on a First Nation in Cape Breton. And they were doing a program on water treatment. And so it was a CSI. This is, again, a problem-solving detective kind of thing. Solve an environmental crime. In this case, it was a high school science class. The kids walk into the class, and there's a dead body. I mean, obviously, drama. a dead body on the table, and the kids have to figure out what killed the person. And in particular, they know it's something in the water, and they have to figure out what was in the water. And so they have to look at these kind of questions, like what was the pathogen? Where did it come from? How did it survive? And they go to the hospital, and they do treatment. They do water testing. They are looking at the lab. They go to the water treatment plant. And they then do a lot of high school science focused around the storyline of who killed this person. So it's a very different kind of sort of version of the same sort of story. Okay, before I want to give you just a couple of examples. Maybe the next question then for you is, has anybody ever done this kind of approach to how they design a program before? If you could throw that in, and maybe Tim can update my last poll.
Yes, Alan, thank you. By the way, great presentation. Yes, in the last question we were asking how many of you are in classrooms, how many of you work in outdoor settings instead, and it's pretty evenly split. Slightly more people working in outdoor settings than in classrooms, but not by much.
Okay. So why would you use this kind of approach? I think there's a whole lot of good reasons. It's learner-centered. It's intrinsically motivating. It's holistic. It creates an experience for the learners. It's structured, yet there's room for discovery. If you take the CSI example, there was a lot of room for then kids to move and try to do their own work. It's problem-solving based here and now and fun and imaginative. Just as I pass through, I want to remind you, obviously you're still going to have set clear outcomes for your program, and then you're going to assess them in particular ways. But that's only half. So what kinds of storylines can we do? Some people say, oh, there's lots of storylines for kids, but what about adults? There's all kinds of possibilities for adults. One storyline we did for adults was to teach them about green purchasing and consumption, and so we based it off a driver's license. Instead, they were getting a consumption license, and they had to take a written test, and then they had to do an actual test in a real house. We had a storyline for fishermen in a small community about water pollution and throwing stuff overboard, and it involved a giant squid because fishermen are always talking about the fish that got away. For university students, we do an environmental makeover of a dorm room, which is pretty amusing, at least here at Octavian. So there's all kinds of stories. With adults, they're a little different in that they need to know the outcomes and the objectives, and then they can get into the story. They don't just do the story for the story's sake, but once they have the outcomes, then they want to continue and have fun just like anybody else. So what kinds of stories, what are possible? One thing is childhood playthemes. I've co-authored a book here in Halifax around self-interpreted trails, nature trails, 24 trails. Each trail has a storyline, and a parent can take their family members, their kids, on the trail and do a series of activities along a trail in a particular place. And again, there's 24 storylines here. An example would be, this is a Cole Harbor Salt Marsh trail, and in this case, the kids become a great blue heron, and they spin around and they turn into a heron, and then they do a whole series of activities along the trail. The idea of the heron is looking for its supper, and what would the heron be eating for supper? It could be fish, it could be mussels, and at each stage along the trail, there's a different activity that fits into the storyline. You can take this creature idea older. We do a residential summer program for 11 to 13, could even go older, where kids learn from the skills of the creatures. They do a wilderness trip, and ultimately they make masks. And some of you may be familiar with the idea of the Council of All Beings. And so the storyline of that program is that the kids need to learn to move and think like animals, and ultimately they have to tell the human at the council what it is that the human is doing to all of the creatures, and particularly their species. You can go with fantasy themes. If you look in the back of this right here, I can do my pointer right there. That's a person. That is EPASH, and this is part of a program for grade 3. It's called Winter Treasures. And EPASH is an endangered shapeshifter who is looking for the kids to come out and help find a friend for EPASH, another shape in nature. And they go out and they do a whole winter program this way. Another, you can go fly along, and here's a trail where kids become superhero air specs if they're in grade 2. I know I've heard of a program, this was quite a while ago in Minnesota, where they were teaching about the Underground Railroad, and high school youth went from farmhouse to farmhouse along a whole weekend, which was all set up. And the story was for them to try to survive and experience what it might have been like at that time to experience the struggles of being on the real Underground Railroad. You can all have historical themes. This is a geological, beautiful section of our coast here in Nova Scotia, where we have a whole series of activities about knights and the stone table. We do community studies. This is a residential program for grade 8 kids, where we present them with a pretty much of a doom vision of the future and a harmony vision of the future and say, we don't know what it's going to end up with, but they need to create their own vision and look at where they're going in terms of the choices they're making. And a whole grade 8 program is based around that. You can join a club. You can create a club. This is a program I've done in Guyana with Cycle Savers, which is grade 4, sort of a Harry Potter kind of theme. You can use books and legends like the Lorax is a good example that a lot of people use. You can start a real business. All kinds of these things can happen. I guess then the next part of this is we've talked a lot about simulation and fantasy, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a very real program with a very real experience. This is a high school program that we're doing right now. In fact, these guys are on tour in Ontario as we speak. And the idea is to become a leader and create a community for change and a mind shift in a high school. So this is a program where a leadership team in a high school presents to the grade 10s and then does events through the whole school. But rather than try to explain to exactly what it's like, I have a very short video here of a minute to explain what mind shift is. Again, this may take a bit to load. The story is a very real one. Young people can shift a culture and shift their minds about how they see the planet. And the way that this whole program works is that the leadership team dresses astronauts, as you can see, moves into a classroom with the lights out or a theater, and presents Spaceship Earth with captains and lieutenants spinning through space from 1890 to 2030, and ultimately a crash. But they wake up from the crash and find out it was a dream, and then do a whole series of skits about how high school students can change the actions through their own lives in a very humorous and dramatic kind of way. And ultimately, they ask people in their school and themselves to shift it in terms of how they approach what they do. Again, the story in this case is a very real one, and it becomes part of the program. We've interviewed a lot of the leaders and kids, youth that have gone through this program. Here's one quote that sort of speaks to that culture. Being open toward this idea of mind shift and sustainability, I think it's like a whole shift of your mind. I keep using that word, but it makes sense because it affects like everything you do. What you talk about, your behavior on some things. When you shift your whole mindset, then you are kind of actively engaging to do something besides just going through these daily, habitual actions. It's like your concept has changed. That's the essence of a good story. It's an experience. It changes the concepts, the lessons in your brain in terms of what you do. And that's a real kind of storyline. So maybe before we finish off the final part, I'd ask you to just comment on what you see as the biggest challenge for this type of approach, and I will briefly then go through some of what I think are some of the issues in generating a good storyline. And maybe Tim can speak up here too.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And yes, the answer, the last question, of course, was to tell us whether you've designed a program similar to this, and really about a quarter said they have. But three-quarters have not. And I can certainly see from the comments that have been flowing into the chat room that you've got rapt attention, and lots of people are very interested and enthralled with the prospect.
Okay, what I think I want to do here is just finish off so we have plenty of time for questions with just a few kind of things that I use and tips in terms of trying to design a storyline topic. One is you need to follow a narrative sequence, the elements of a story: plot, character, setting. Set the scene, introduce the characters, pose the problem, cause things to happen. Also, you're going to make sure you're doing something that's meaningful. Just doing fantasy for fantasy's sake is not the best. You want to parallel what skills are you trying to develop, and that's going to be the story. If I'm trying to do problem solving and investigative ability, a detective theme is a good idea. What are some of the characteristics of a strong storyline? First of all, it's going to provide an engaging context based on who your learners are. You need to find things that they're interested in. You need to have some solid program outcomes. You need a hook. You need a way to grab them. You need to allow time for them to create with you. The more time you have, the better. In some storyline in classrooms, they take a whole semester to work on a given storyline, and the kids have incredible space to do that. In an outdoor setting where resources are thin and kids are not there for very long, it's a bit more of a tighter process. You need to give them opportunities to develop and practice those practical skills and understanding. One of the great things about this is since it's kids experiencing things for themselves, they can learn at the various different levels of their abilities as they go forth. Also, you want to pull the learners along with anticipation, with magic, with adventure, and you want to provide opportunities for follow-up and expansion. So just to come back to where I started, the truth about stories is that's what we really are. We're not about standing up and talking about outcomes to people. The truth is what we really are. And so what we need to do, I think, is let's design programs that bring stories to life for the learners. Let's not be the educator I am in the top right, but more like the educator I am in the left, where I'm teaching about fossil fuels. And there's a whole audience of grade 8 kids you can't see out there. So that's kind of what a storyline is in a very basic kind of way. Thanks very much. That's kind of my formal part of this, and then we will kind of move on to questions and let me try to respond to some things. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alan. So, ladies and gentlemen, now's your time to start typing questions into the chat room, and we'll take. I'm not going to necessarily take them sequentially, but fire away, and I will try and get everyone's question in. So, start typing, and basically, you should see in your bottom left-hand corner of your screen, it should say "to main room." And one question is, Alan, can we see that last slide again?
There we go.
Alan, someone's already asking, is there any way of accessing those narratives that you just described?
I tell you what, I'm going to skip through here to this next slide. There's a whole bunch of things, a couple articles that I've written for Green Teacher, one quite a while ago. The two websites here are the website which has the Mysterious Encounter material on it is www.earthed.ns.ca. If you want to know more about the more general storyline approach in terms of the whole approach, then storyline.org. It's not an environmental ed site, it's an educational site. It has some links off that. And Creating Worlds, Constructing Meaning is the storyline method Jeff Creswell wrote. It's a nice book, has some examples from there. So that might be a place to start. Most of the examples that I've used here are obviously programs we've designed, and you can find out more about them on earthed.ns.ca. And they're through the Halifax Regional Adventure Earth Center, which is a place that I've worked with for over 30 years in terms of the work we do. We do some of these programs at Acadia here at the university. Some of my university students are involved in delivering Mysterious Encounters, for example.
Alan, Becca Curlin is asking, how many people do you need to pull off a program like this? And as you've pointed out, Becca, you're the only person at your site, I guess. So, Alan, any advice?
you can do this in any kinds of ways. So, for example, if you go look at the books, they'll just use this one teacher in a classroom. If you're in a classroom, and you can pull it off there. If you're at an outdoor site, it depends on. I mean, generally, good outdoor experiential learning, you can't lead 30 people with one leader. What we've done is we only have one leader for 30 kids. And so that's why we use high school students and university students as part of their leadership credit to run a program. So we have one leader, which is what maybe a center has, but we have 8 to 10 high school students doing a dynamo job of leading a program with kids in groups of 6. So we can create an experiential program with groups of 6, 2 leaders per group of 6. The high school students get credit as a volunteer service, and they get really engaged. And in some sense, we started these programs for grade 5s, grade 4s, grade 3s. In fact, we as much do it for the high school leadership now. We have kids that have gone off, and basically becoming a leader in these programs has kind of changed their life and their direction. We've got people in sustainability programs going on to be teachers, you name it, in terms of where we're going.
Alan, I'm just going to answer a bunch of questions with one answer questions have been raised in various ways. And it's all reflective of the fact that people have really enjoyed this presentation so far. Yes, the answer is yes to 6 or 7 questions people have asked about where they can follow up or listen in on this presentation again. We're going to send out an email tomorrow to everyone who was on this call and to everyone else who registered but didn't make it tonight. There's always a bunch who can't make it at the last minute. But anyways, and that email will include a URL for where you can see this presentation archived, and you're more than welcome. And please do encourage other people to go and check out the archive. They will have to also register for an upcoming web. They'll have to register in order to get onto the WIMBA system. But that's not. But you have already done that, and once you or they have done it, anyone can go and check out the archives of any of the webinars. We did one last week, as I mentioned. Alan is tonight, and we have 2 more this week that I'm excited about. So do take the opportunity to forward the archive link when you get it tomorrow to anyone you wish.
I just see a question there I can answer quick. There's that preschoolers. There are preschool storylines. It's a bit of a different experience, obviously. I wrote an article for the journal Canadian Children in the last year with Mary Swetman, and in that is kind of this kind of approach for preschoolers. So there's some ideas there.
And Becca is also asking another question. What's the average program length for a meaningful engagement? Is it multi-day? Is it or does this only work across a longer period of time?
It can have any. I mean, it does need a bit of time to develop it, obviously. So I don't think you do it in one class period. 4 or 5 hours is fine, and whether those 4 or 5 hours are in a community or in a classroom, and they're an hour and a half a day for 3 days, or whether it's 1 day intensively outside, or whether it's 4 days in a residential camp, or whether it's a whole semester, you can take it where you want. It's like you can do a 20-minute skit or a 5-minute skit. You can do a 20-minute short play, or you can do an hour and a half feature. That's kind of up to you. You do need a bit of time, more than a given lesson or 2, to develop it, though, I think.
Alan, Joe Burke, Joe, you've asked this question before, and I wasn't quite sure whether that was in response to someone else, but here's the question. Can you speak, Alan, to the authenticity of these programs? I know you mentioned it, but I'm worried that teacher and student time and energy is focused on the narrative and not on the science.
There's no doubt that time is focused on the narrative, but kids, if you build a good storyline, and when we talk the science one for high school, there's an immense amount of work that went into that CSI storyline. So, for example, they had to pull out of the fun of the narrative of figuring out what's done it, to figure out how you take a pH test and work through that lesson. So in some sense, they pulled into a much more standard lesson format to get some of the skills across to go back to the storyline. But that still gives a narrative meaning to the reason you're teaching pH and what you're doing. So yes, it does take some time, but the kind of learning you get is amazing as a result.
Great. People are still typing in great suggestions into the chat room. I don't have any more questions at the moment. So, folks, if you have, we'll certainly pause and give you a moment to type anything else in.
There's one other slide I haven't talked about, which I wouldn't mind touching on if there's time here, while people are doing that.
Well, go for it, and we'll give people a chance to type in a question or two.
Yeah. One of the things that's beneath this approach, and it's deeper than some of it, is how we learn and how we are going to encourage people to take action in terms of reducing environmental impact. And there's a whole bunch of research on this, and I know a lot of stuff behind this slide. But traditionally in education, people focused on the idea, well, if we just teach people knowledge and concepts, then they'll start to care about things, and then they'll start to do something. In fact, that's shown not to be true. Not to say that knowledge doesn't help us do other things, but it doesn't. It's not a sure thing, and it's not where we start in some sense. We have in fact, the people that have destroyed the planet to the greatest extent are the most educated societies on this planet. So in some sense, it's really important to talk and start with feelings and values in a holistic, experiential way, which is what Storyline does. It starts with the experience of the learners and the whole set of feelings, and it's from the feelings and values. As you start to care about something, you want to learn about it, and you want to understand the concepts and knowledge. Going back to the question before, was it a takeaway from the science? No, when you start to care, then you want to know and you want to understand. And then you want to develop some skills to do something about it, and then you start developing the sense of empowerment and you start to take action. So I see a lot of this as based in the feelings and values as a place to start. And then recognize, in fact, this diagram is a bit skewy in the sense that the arrow should go both directions. Because once you have feelings, you develop concepts, and then it goes back to feelings, etc. And things are, it's like a web in terms of interaction. I think that lies beneath this whole approach.
Alan, I do have a question. It was really just going back to the, you mentioned someone wanted to know that preschool reference again. Didn't you say there was a Canadian Journal of Environmental Education?
No, it's the Canadian Children. Well, I will sort of try. I think I can maybe find the direct reference here as we go forward here. While I'm kind of clicking in here.
Well, you can also send it to me after the webinar, and we'll stick it on the email that everyone who's on this call will receive tomorrow. So no need to go far away from it this way.
Not too bad. Any questions? I haven't really. I tried to focus on the chat.
No, we haven't. No, indeed, lots of good chat, but no.
Let me find this. Here it is. It's the Canadian Children. It was in 2009, volume 34, number 2. Canadian Children, the Journal of Canadian Association for Young Children, volume 34, number 2. It's called Integrating Nature Experiences into Early Childhood Education.
Great. Okay. And again, feel free to send me a link for that afterwards. Okay. A question. A couple more questions. Here we go. Trying to go back to now we're getting lots of questions coming fast and furiously. I'm trying to get to the ones in turn here. Okay, from John, and hi, John Gust. Question for you, Alan. Can you speak to us on using this approach? How using this approach can help to transform our dominant. Oops, I just lost it here. Go back and get it here. Dominant narrative so that you have a new story to live sustainably by. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Can you speak to us on using this approach? I think it means how you can use this approach can help to transform our quote-unquote dominant narrative so that we can have a new story to live sustainably by.
Wow, I think that's a wonderful question. It's funny because I just did a talk in Newfoundland, and I started out with the unsustainable stories, moving to the sustainable ones. Unfortunately, I think as environmental educators, we often tell people why we are unsustainable and what the unsustainable story is, and you have a picture of the earth that with smoke on it or whatever. I think we can tell positive stories. So the way you tell the story, if you set it as a positive frame. So Mysterious Encounters is the way we will have healthy food, fresh air, and clean water is by touching the earth, knowing the workings of the earth, and understanding it. It's a positive message. The same thing with things like Mindshift. It's all the things that we can do, and it's a shift in how we think based on this narrative kind of approach. So the idea is to create positive stories. Just like any novel or anything else, you can, any movie, they can be pretty depressing, but they don't have to be. And I think it's up to us as educators to create and facilitate positive stories, not to say that we don't at times have to be realistic about the problems with older learners, but still, it's positive stories we need to facilitate.
Alan, another question from Catherine here. What's your technique with kids to become uninterested in the story? She's saying she has a problem with kids that are thinking that they're way too cool for this sort of thing.
It depends on your story, and it depends on your age group. If you try to do EPASH and the snowdrift with 12 or 13-year-olds, you're in trouble. However, if you've got a story that is good for Vision 2020, which is what's the future going to look like, that's for 14-year-olds. 14-year-olds are a tough audience generally. They don't like to play and do fantasy because they're a little close to it. But they will engage totally in a very serious story, and they want to have a lot of fun, and they want to have a lot of physical activity in the way. But if the story suits them, you're going to get them engaged. And I'm not saying that, like anything else, there will be learners that don't engage. We all know that we can do the best thing in the world, and we're still going to have people that have stuff going on in their life that's going to make it difficult for them. To that extent, you're going to have to fall back on your group facilitation and your behavioral management that you do. But my experience is that if I have one problem in 5 in a classroom, I have one problem in 100 when I'm out with a storyline that's working for people. Because people are moving, they're engaged, they're experiencing, and they generally enjoy it if you've got a story that's going to work for that given age group. And that is important. You've got to find the right story in the right place for the right age group.
Alan, we've got 2 good questions here, 2 more good questions. One, and I just lost the one. I'm playing with the chat room here too, like everybody else, and somehow it just moves on. The question was about citizen science. Can you talk about citizen science applications such as collecting data and how that might be part of all this?
I haven't actually used that example much in the work that I do, but I don't see why it wouldn't be an incredible one. We have a whole bunch of citizen science happening around here in Nova Scotia. In fact, we're actually designing, come to think of it, we're designing a storyline program now, which is kind of loosely uses PlantWatch and some of the things from that in it. But in some sense, the data collection becomes part of the story, and in this case, the story may well be the real story, not a fictional story. And so that you go and you use it from there. The program that we're in the process of designing is for grade 6s, and it's learning about plants and pollinators of plants. And the story is basically the kids learn about what it means to be a pollinator and how they need certain kinds of species to survive. And we're looking at what kinds of, they're trying to select species of plants that will enable the pollinators to survive in the wild and to plant those plants. Of course, they come to realize they pretty nearly have to plant a whole ecosystem, and that's part of the goal at the end of it. But the point is, PlantWatch is part of that, and I think that there's a great opportunity for having citizen science stuff be part of this in a very real way.
Alan, John Gusta has got another great question about dystopian versus utopian literature. Let me just ask the question. It's, excuse me, do you know of any stories that are ecotopian other than Ernest Callenbach's famous novel by that title? He said, today we're seeing lots of dystopian children's literature. So do you know any other ecotopian literature other than Callenbach's novel?
I don't know. I just can't think of stuff off the top of my head. But there is, there's all kinds of stuff that seems like there should be more. I thought there was a response to Callenbach's novel, but I'm pretty foggy on this, to tell you the truth. I do think things exist, but I don't exactly know where they are.
Indeed. Okay, I'm seeing no other questions at the moment. Let's just.
Well, Ishmael, I just see Ishmael on the chat line. That's a pretty good one. Ishmael's a fascinating. I mean, that's what Ishmael is. For people who are familiar with Daniel Quinn's work, I've given that to my university students, and a third of my university students think that it's the stupidest book they've ever seen, and the other two-thirds never put it down. But that's what it is. For those who aren't familiar with it, Ishmael is a gorilla and is telling the story of humans' environmental impact, although it's not always the positive story, I must say, in Daniel Quinn, but still a very effective kind of way. That would be an incredible book to, you could put a university course and make it a storyline course using Ishmael as the story. It would be a pretty amazing kind of program.
Alan, we do have another question from Becca about what's the cost to run a program like this, and do you get grants to run such programs?
Basically, in terms of cost, we sort of have a premise that we don't want to get grants to maintain a program because it's very hard to get grants continually. So we try to make these programs in the running of them cost recovery. The place we do get grants is to build the props, to organize the program, to write it, because that's a one-timer. Everybody wants to give you a grant to do one time to create something. They never want to give you money to maintain it. So what we do, for example, with these day programs in the outdoors, okay, so we've gotten grants and support to write the program. On the other hand, when the class comes to our center, they do pay. They pay $200 a day to come to the center. Well, that $200 pays the salary of the coordinator. The high school students are free. They're volunteers, or the university students. So really, we've got the one salary, and we actually have, if you can do your figuring, we don't pay them. Unfortunately, we don't pay really well in this world. So the $200 is more than what the coordinator makes in a given day by a bit. But some of that extra money goes to booklets and a variety of things. Now, it doesn't all totally break even on the administration side. We do have some core administrative funding. But most centers or schools do. There's different kinds of storylines. If you're going to write a very structured storyline along the lines of Mysterious Encounters, you aren't going to do all that work and just run it once. In that case, that's more for an outdoor center where lots of classes can come through this program. On the other hand, if you're a teacher in a classroom, you can do a much looser story and create it. And I think some of that, the storyline book by Jeff Creswell will give you some ideas. That doesn't take a lot of money. That's you working with kids in your classroom, and they may work in groups, and they do a little more presentation, and they do more co-creation themselves. So it doesn't have to cost money.
Alan, that's great. And I think we've kind of run out of questions here, so probably it's time for us to wrap this up and just have we do have a final survey to ask everybody that we'll proceed to in a second, just a quick one. And those who take a minute or two to fill out the survey will have an opportunity to win a free one of two subscriptions to Green Teacher that we'll be giving away. And thank you, Alan, for advancing it. And please be honest about this. This is not all going to appear in the chat room, so don't worry. You won't hurt anybody's feelings. But, was this presentation terrible, poor, fair, good, very good, or fabulous? And you can see the next two questions. So you'll need to type in, what did you like best about this presentation, and how could it have been more helpful to you? Those are the two questions beyond that'll need your personal touch, if you wouldn't mind. And we have the fourth question was unfortunately copied over from the last survey, which was, would you be more interested in more in-depth follow-up presentation on sustainability? Obviously, would you be more interested in a more follow-up in-depth presentation? I'm not sure if we could do if anyone could do a more follow-up in-depth presentation than Alan just gave us here. But if there was such a presentation to be done, would you be interested? Yes, no. And finally, last but not least, we're asking, because we're interested to know if you actually already were familiar with our nonprofit magazine, and if you'd never heard of it on the one extreme, or you read it every issue. That's really helpful for us to know as well. We hope to do a lot more of these webinars beyond those that we're planning this spring, and so that's helpful for us to know whether most people are new, never heard about Green Teacher, or they're quite familiar. And of course, press the submit button when you've had a chance to fill it in. Give you another 20 seconds or 30 seconds here. I also want to thank my assistant, Bridgepal Patel, who's been working in the background. He wasn't able. Who did a great job with the technical side. It appears that I've got a problem with my headset here, which I'll have to fix for tomorrow night's webinar. But somehow we managed to make it work. And Alan, your presentation was fantastic, and you can see this reflected in the comments in the chat room that have been there. I've had a better chance to see them than you throughout it, but you can certainly see them now. Very much reflective of a fabulous presentation. So a huge thanks to you, and thanks to everyone for signing up tonight for this webinar. It was really fun, in spite of my being on a dial-up connection. But fabulous presentation, Alan. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks to Bridge. She's done a lot of work. Like everything else, there's someone behind the scenes that's really doing all the work. That's Bridge. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Alan. So good night, everybody, and we hope to see you at another webinar and look forward to
Thanks,
getting that
Tim.
email
Thanks,
tomorrow.
Alan. Thank you, everyone.